Would you give us your name, your institutional affiliation, and your teaching and research interests?
Sure thing. Hi, John. My name is Hank Keithley. I teach at Mesa Community College in the Department of English and Humanities. Broadly speaking, I'm interested in 18th century British lit and culture, but my work has tended to focus on the history of science and relationship of science to problems in history and historiography in that period.
We are here at ASU to attend the NEH Summer Institute on Bioengineering, Ethics and the Humanities, which is organized by the Center for Biology and Society and the Center for Applied Ethics. Given your research and teaching interests and your professional background, what drew you to this institute?
I don't get a lot of opportunity to talk with people at my in my day-to-day job. At my place, we don't have a lot of these discussions. We don't have the opportunities to participate in this kind of interdisciplinary work. My background, I do have a degree in molecular biology. It's something that I'm versed in and I've always been interested in. And so the opportunity to pick up this broad issue of the intersection of the humanities and the sciences, and getting to engage with good people and interesting people like yourself, to talk about these things in a serious way with a mind towards some kind of practical applications was something that really attracted me to this institute. And it didn't take much thought for me to know that this would be a good way to use my time this summer, and I have not been disappointed at all.
You mentioned your background in molecular biology and your other interests. Based on your experience as an educator, how easy or difficult would you say it is for faculty to do this kind of interdisciplinary work?
If you're in the right place, it becomes a lot easier. There are not a lot of places like ASU that have the means and the relationships and I'd say the institutional interest in place already to do this. But you see here when those elements are in place, a lot of incredible things can happen. For the rest of us, it's not so easy, and the job is starting to lay the groundwork so that these conversations can happen to break down the kind of institutional and disciplinary silos, so that we can talk about these disciplines in context with each other, as opposed to apositionally, which is often, unfortunately, the way that they're still presented. So we can get there. It's going to take work. It poses challenges, but once that structure is in place, it becomes easier and easier, and it'll work. It'll work better.
In our institute, we have heard or we've interacted with scientists, with physicians, with speech pathologists, with lab operators or directors, a range of other people. And we've also read a lot of material outside of what could traditionally be called English studies or the English major, so to speak. Could you comment on one or two ideas, writers, or lab experiments or discussions we've had over the last few weeks that seem to you particularly insightful?
Well, first of all, I just want to say it's funny. We've read a lot of this wonderful secondary material from a lot of different disciplines. Um, the, the only thing, we didn't get any secondary material from English. We're stuck with Dr. Moreau's Frankenstein and left to have at it. But definitely, going back even to the first part of the seminar, when we're talking about this idea of what is it actually going to look like um, to get people together to talk about how the humanities and how the sciences interact, especially when it comes to issues like ethics and practice, and what do these things even start to look like. That's a question I hadn't really thought about before. I just simply thought that um, scholars that have engaged minds would be able to do that without necessarily having to think about what everybody's going to bring to the table. I thought it would be a more interesting process, or an easier process, pardon me. So this idea of how we have to even negotiate to get to that step is something that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time here. The other kind of thing that I'm really interested in, that we've talked about in several contexts, is the idea of the knowledge deficit model of teaching and interacting. Um, and it's something that I hadn't necessarily thought about with the scholarship I like to do, but the more I've started to think about it, and I've started to think about questions about how science came to be institutionalized immediately after the scientific revolution, a lot of the rhetorical tropes and apologies are centered around a very early version of, of the knowledge deficit model and this kind of scientific ethos that emerges in the 16th and early 17th and into the 18th century. It's all predicated on a knowledge deficit model. So that's something I hadn't thought about a lot before, but as I'm set to go forward, I'm going to be thinking a lot more about that. It's really helped me rethink the way I was reading the early Royal Society there in London in the 1660s.
Hank, you mentioned knowledge deficit model, the phrase. Would you explain what that means?
It's the assumption by people in this context who practice science. They assume that other audiences don't know as much about science as they do, the role of the scientist, what science should be doing. For example, should it lead to technology? Should it lead to theoretical knowledge? Is it knowledge just for the sake of knowledge? But it's the job of the scientist to delineate that to a public that's eager to know, and once they're instructed, they're going to kind of fall into line and understand the practical importance of science. It's a type of a way of demonstrating and crafting not just rhetorical, but in some ways ideological power. And when you're talking about in this historical period when science is emerging as perhaps the dominant epistemology, which it's become today, that kind of trope, those kind of assumptions were absolutely at the center of that. And even the very best of from what I've read previously and what I've been thinking about in terms of secondary scholarship, this hasn't been looked at as much, and it's going to be a pretty fruitful, I think, avenue for research there.
Thank you for that helpful explanation, Hank. Finally, what role would you say a liberal arts education can play in preparing students to face the challenges of the 21st century?
It's everything. It's everything. We have gotten so compartmentalized and so career focused with our college tracks now. We've totally lost sight of the fact that real world applications are interdisciplinary. If we don't model these for our students, we don't challenge them for our students with them, we don't give our students the opportunity to interact in meaningful ways with students with other interests that are coming from different perspectives, we're not giving them a fair shot to become productive citizens. However, they're going to define that term, whether they're going to go on with their education somewhere else or going to go out into the job force, whatever they're going to do, we need to help them understand the way the world around them is functioning. And more our world is functioning in interdisciplinary ways. So we do a big disservice if we don't have our students working within that framework to some extent.
Thank you very much, Hank, for those insightful comments. Thank you, and I look forward to interacting with you and knowing more of your work as we move forward. And
John,
thank you for taking the time to do this.
John, it's been a real pleasure. I look forward to working with you in the future too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thank you.